Welcome back to History Bites, and today we're diving into one of the most intense and impactful periods of the 20th century, the Cold War. Here's a rapid-fire recap of the major events that defined this era. Let's jump right into it. Oh, I don't like that. The Cold War was a state of political tension primarily between the United States and the Soviet Union emerging after World War II. It was a battle for influence between two superpowers, so why was it called the Cold War? It wasn't a traditional war with tanks and troops, but rather a tense standoff with lots of political maneuvering, proxy wars, and of course, a nuclear arms race. It all started with the division of Europe following World War II. Western Europe, under the leadership of the United States, embraced capitalism and democracy, forming the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, better known just as NATO. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union established the Eastern Bloc, made up of primarily Eastern European countries where communism and the Warsaw Pact dominated. One of the earliest flashpoints of the Cold War was the Korean War. In 1950, North Korea, backed by the Soviet Union and China, invaded South Korea. The United Nations, with the US's support, intervened to repel the invasion. After a ton of back and forth fighting, the division between the North and the South eventually stabilized to the borders that we know and love today. Okay, we don't really love those borders. Ideally, Korea would just be one Korea. But I digress. Some 15 years later, another significant conflict would rope the United States back into the fighting. This time it was the Vietnam War. The US had hoped to contain the spread of communism, supporting South Vietnam against North Vietnam, but the war was particularly brutal and was characterized by a gradual erosion of support in the United States, most notably from the American public. Eventually, the United States would exit the war, clearing the way for the communist North to eventually reunite Vietnam, but under communism, which of course, if you were an American at the time, was not ideal. So now let's talk about that one time that the US and the Soviet Union almost blew each other up in a nuclear war. That would be the Cuban Missile Crisis. In 1962, the US discovered that the Soviet Union had deployed nuclear missiles in Cuba just 90 miles off the coast of Florida. After tense negotiations and a naval blockade, both sides finally stepped back from the brink of nuclear apocalypse, and ultimately nuclear war was avoided. Lucky us. The Cold War also fueled competition beyond Earth's atmosphere, sparking the space race, a race between the US and the Soviet Union to achieve scientific and military dominance in space. This rivalry led to several huge accomplishments by humans. The Soviets, for instance, put someone in space for the first time ever, and of course the Americans were the first to land people on the moon. Back on Earth, the division between East and West was epitomized by the Berlin Wall, which was originally built in 1961. It physically separated the cities of Berlin, which technically were two cities, which is why I said cities in the first place, East Berlin, which was in East Germany, and West Berlin, which of course was in West Germany. The wall was a symbol of Cold War tensions until its collapse, or rather its destruction, in 1989, marking a turning point in the conflict, and in hindsight, it also signaled the end of communist dominance in Eastern Europe. In 1991, just 2 years later, the Soviet Union officially dissolved, bringing an end to the Cold War, leading to a new world order without the Soviet Union in it at all, and the United States rising as the lone superpower in the world. So, what were the lasting legacies of the Cold War? Well, the ideological struggle between communism and capitalism defined much of the 20th century. The Cold War also left a significant impact on culture, technology, and even sports, as rivalries were played out in front of the world stage, such as in the Olympics, when the USA, beat the Soviets 1980. Miracle on Ice. Look it up.
5 seconds left in the game. Do you believe in miracles? Yes!
While the Cold War wasn't characterized by outright fighting between the world's two superpowers, it did entail fighting in various countries, and it did entail the superpowers vying for dominance in every conceivable way. So, who won the Cold War? In a sense, no one did. The world's most powerful country spent the better part of 50 years in an anxious game of chicken that could have resulted in nuclear warfare at any moment. In another sense, everyone alive today won because, we're alive and the countries didn't blow each other up. So that's good. So that's an overview of some of the major events of the Cold War. Hopefully that gives you at least a base level understanding of the timeline of the Cold War, though not everything there was in chronological order. But regardless, if you like the video, like and share buttons are down below, and of course, I'll see you all in the next video.